Dan Bongino leaned into the microphone, his movements slow and deliberate. The House Oversight Committee hearing room was buzzing with the low-level hum of 100 conversations, the click of camera shutters, and the shuffling of papers. But when Bongino spoke, the noise died instantly. "Today," he said, his voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly devoid of emotion, "I am going to prove you are the biggest fraud in congressional history." He didn't shout it. He didn't say it with anger. He said it like he was reading a weather report, like he was stating a simple, immutable fact that everyone in the room would soon accept as truth. The room went dead silent. Every camera, every reporter, every staffer froze in place. The air pressure seemed to drop. Then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a performance laugh, a bright, theatrical sound she had practiced in front of mirrors for years. It was the kind of laugh designed to signal that the person speaking was beneath her, a joke not worth taking seriously. It was the laugh that played perfectly on Instagram stories and TikTok clips. "Oh, this should be good," she said, leaning into her own microphone. Her blazer, a stunning white designer piece that retailed for $3,000, caught the studio lights perfectly. Her team had spent 45 minutes on her makeup that morning, ensuring she looked every inch the defiant, unbothered icon. This was supposed to be her moment. She was ready for another viral clip of her destroying a Republican witness with a witty clap back. "A failed cop turned podcast bro is going to lecture me about fraud," she said, pausing for effect. She looked around the room with exaggerated disbelief, inviting the audience to share in the joke. "What's next? You going to try to sell me some gold coins? Maybe some survival food for the apocalypse?" Scattered laughter rippled from the Democratic side of the dais. A few young staffers in the gallery pulled out their phones, ready to capture what they assumed would be another legendary AOC takedown. She was in her element now. This was what she did. This was who she was. The clapback queen, the social media warrior, the voice of a generation. "Maybe you should stick to screaming into a microphone for angry boomers," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "Leave the real work to people who actually understand policy." More laughter. A staffer gave her a thumbs up from the sidelines. Bongino didn't move. He didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his large hands folded on the table, watching her performance with the absolute patience of a man who had spent 12 years in the Secret Service. He had protected presidents. He had faced down genuine threats. He knew the difference between a real fight and a performance. He had learned to wait. The laughter faded. The silence stretched. Ocasio-Cortez's smile flickered just for a moment. She wasn't used to opponents who didn't react. She fed on reactions. She needed the anger, the outrage, the sputtering defense. It was the fuel for her fire. But Bongino gave her nothing but a cold, hard stare. "You done?" Bongino asked finally. His voice was flat, unimpressed. "I'm just getting started, tough guy," she shot back. "You represent everything wrong with—" "Good." Bongino reached down and opened his briefcase. The leather was worn, practical. Nothing fancy. It was the briefcase of a man who worked for a living. "So am I." He pulled out a single folder. It wasn't thick. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a plain, standard-issue manila folder with a typed label on the front. He set it on the table with a soft slap, positioning it carefully so every camera in the room could read the words clearly. The label said, "Ocasio-Cortez, the fraud." The room stirred. Whispers rippled through the gallery. The cameras zoomed in. $47 million, Bongino said. He let those words hang in the air. He didn't rush them. He gave them space to breathe, to expand, to fill every corner of the room. That is how much money flowed through your network of PACs, LLCs, and shell companies in 4 years, Bongino said. $47 million from people who believed in you, from people who thought you were different. He opened the folder. I know where every single penny went, he said, looking down at the papers. Every transfer, every payment, every lie. He looked up, locking eyes with her. His gaze was steady, certain, dangerous. By the time I'm done here today, he promised, so will everyone watching. He pulled out the first document. You should have stayed a bartender, Congresswoman, Bongino said softly. At least, that was an honest job. Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth to respond, to clap back, to do what she always did. But no words came out. Her throat felt dry. The script in her head had vanished. For the first time in her political career, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had nothing to say. And Dan Bongino was just getting started. Dan Bongino flipped to the first section of the folder. He moved with the methodical patience of a man who had built cases against drug cartels and protected the most powerful people on earth. Every gesture was deliberate. Every pause was calculated. He wasn't performing for the cameras. He was presenting evidence to a jury of millions. Let's start with something simple, he said, smoothing the paper on the table. Let's talk about how you live. Ocasio-Cortez rolled her eyes with practiced dismissiveness, leaning back in her chair. Oh, here we go, she sighed into the microphone. The right-wing obsession with my clothes. Very original, very creative. Do you want to talk about my lipstick next? Not your clothes, Congresswoman, Bongino corrected her, his voice cutting through her sarcasm. Your choices, the canyon between what you preach and how you actually live your life. He picked up the first document. It was a standard lease agreement, heavily redacted except for the address and the monthly rent. You talk a lot about affordable housing, Bongino began. You call it a human right. You say working families are being crushed by rent, pushed out of their neighborhoods, forced to choose between food and shelter. You call landlords parasites. You advocate for rent control. He set the lease on the table, face up. Your apartment in Navy Yard, Washington, D.C., he read, $3,500 a month. A luxury building with a rooftop pool, a state-of-the-art fitness center, a pet spa, and a 24-hour concierge service. He looked up at her. That rent, just the rent, is more than most families in your district earn in an entire month. Not their housing budget, their total income. Everything they make from working 2 or 3 jobs. Ocasio-Cortez shifted in her seat. Her posture changed slightly, a tightening of the shoulders. The cameras caught it. That is standard for D.C. housing prices, she shot back quickly. Members of Congress need to maintain 2 residences. It is expensive to live here. I am not going to apologize for having a safe place to sleep. Do they need to live in luxury? Bongino asked. He pulled out another document, a spreadsheet with highlighted rows. Here is a list of available apartments within 2 miles of the Capitol building, Bongino said. Plenty of options under $2,000, some under $2,500. Modest places, safe places, the kind of places working people live, the kind of places your staff lives. He set the list down next to the lease. But you didn't want those, he said. You wanted the luxury building, the one with the amenities that most of your constituents will never experience in their lifetimes, the one that costs more per month than some of them earn in 6 weeks of full-time, back-breaking work. He paused, leaning forward. Nothing wrong with wanting nice things, Congresswoman. Nothing wrong with enjoying success. But there is something deeply wrong with building your entire political brand on telling other people they can't have nice things while you live in luxury. Ocasio-Cortez's attorney, sitting behind her, leaned over and whispered something urgently. She waved him away with an irritated, sharp gesture. She didn't want legal advice. She wanted to win the argument. Bongino moved to the next exhibit. "Let's talk about the Green New Deal," he said. "Your signature legislation. The policy that made you a national figure." He pulled out a thick stack of papers. "You stood on the floor of the House and said climate change is an existential threat. You said we have 12 years to act, or the world as we know it will end. You said every American needs to radically change how they live, how they travel, how they consume." He pulled out a spreadsheet. 66 flights in 12 months, Bongino read from the FAA records. Every single one of them, first class or business class. The room stirred. Reporters began typing furiously. "Your personal carbon footprint from air travel alone is larger than 20 average American families combined," Bongino said. 20 families. In 1 year. He set the spreadsheet down. "You want working people to give up their cars. You want them to stop eating meat. You want them to fundamentally transform their lives to save the planet." He looked at her with a calm, piercing gaze. "But first class is more comfortable, isn't it?" Ocasio-Cortez grabbed her microphone, her voice pitched higher now. "Those were work-related flights, for official congressional business. I have to travel to do my job." "Were they?" Bongino reached into the folder and pulled out a photograph. It was a glossy 8x10 print. He held it up so every camera could see it clearly. "This is Miami Beach," Bongino said, "February 2021, while Texas was freezing, while people were literally dying without power or heat in a catastrophic winter storm." The photo showed Ocasio-Cortez in a bikini, a champagne glass in hand, laughing on a beach cabana. "You flew to Florida for a fundraiser," Bongino narrated. "A fundraiser at a beachfront mansion, while your colleagues were organizing relief efforts and your constituents in New York were dealing with their own winter weather emergencies." He set the photo down. "This image was posted by a friend of yours on Instagram," Bongino noted. "They deleted it within an hour when someone pointed out the optics. But nothing ever really disappears from the internet, does it?" He pulled out another image. "And here you are 2 days later," he said, "back in New York, tweeting about climate justice and the urgent need for the Green New Deal." He looked at her with something approaching pity. "The champagne on the beach was nice, though, I'm sure." Ocasio-Cortez's face flushed red. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "That was a previously scheduled." "Let's move on," Bongino interrupted. He wasn't interested in her explanations. He was building a case, brick by brick. "You champion defunding the police," Bongino said. "You say communities don't need armed officers patrolling their streets. You say the money should go to social services instead. Mental health workers, community programs, anything but cops." He spread out a new set of documents, financial disclosures. "Your personal security expenses for the last 2 years," Bongino said. "Exposed through financial disclosures that your office tried very hard to bury in paperwork." He pointed to the total at the bottom of the page. "Over $70,000, Bongino read. "Exposed right here in black and white." "Armed private security," Bongino clarified. "Trained professionals with guns. For you. To keep you safe. While you tell single mothers in the Bronx that they don't need police protection. That is completely different, she snapped. I receive credible death threats. My life has been— So do they, Congresswoman. Bongino's voice hardened, cracking like a whip. The single mother working the night shift at a bodega in your district faces threats every night. The elderly man walking home from church faces threats. The kids trying to get to school through gang territory face threats. Real threats, Bongino said. Constant threats. He paused, letting the silence fill the room. The difference is, he said quietly, they can't afford $70,000 in private security. And you want to take away the only protection they have? The room was completely silent now. Even the clicking of keyboards had stopped. The hypocrisy was laid bare, undeniable and ugly. Bongino pulled out one more set of documents from this section. Your staff, he said. The people who work for you every day. The young idealists who believed in your message and wanted to be part of your movement. He read from an official filing. Anonymous complaints filed with the Office of Congressional Ethics. Let me read you some highlights. He adjusted his reading glasses. Quote, the Congresswoman demands absolute loyalty, but treats staff like personal servants. Unpaid overtime is expected, and any complaints are met with threats about career consequences. End quote. He flipped to another page. Quote, she preaches about workers' rights on television, but runs her own office like a sweatshop. Interns work full-time hours with no compensation, while she gives speeches about living wages. End quote. Another page. Quote, there are two versions of her. The public one who cares about working people, and the private one who screams at junior staff for bringing the wrong coffee. End quote. He set the documents down. The champion of the working class, Bongino said, can't even treat her own workers with basic human decency. Ocasio-Cortez's voice cracked. Those complaints were never substantiated. They are anonymous accusations from disgruntled. They are sworn statements, Congresswoman, Bongino interrupted, filed under penalty of perjury, from people who worked for you, who believed in you, who saw who you really are when the cameras aren't rolling. Bongino closed that section of the folder with a deliberate finality. But you know what, he said. Living like a hypocrite isn't actually a crime. It's just sad, just pathetic, just proof that you don't believe a single word of what you preach. He opened the next section. The pages were thicker here, denser with numbers and legal jargon. This, Bongino said, is where we get to the actual crimes. The air in the hearing room had shifted from tense to suffocating. Dan Bongino had dismantled the persona, the clothes, the flights, the security detail. He had exposed the hypocrisy. But hypocrisy, as he had noted, isn't a crime. It's just politics. Now, he was moving on to the felonies. Let's talk about money, Bongino said. His voice dropped an octave, becoming grave. Specifically, let's talk about the $47 million that flowed through your political network in 4 years. He reached into the briefcase and pulled out a large, complex diagram printed on poster board. It looked like a map of the London Underground, but instead of stations, there were boxes labeled with names of organizations. Lines crisscrossed everywhere. Solid lines, dotted lines, red lines. Brand New Congress PAC, Bongino read, pointing to a box at the top. Justice Democrats, Courage to Change PAC. 3 organizations, all connected to you. All moving money in patterns that would make a professional money launderer jealous. Ocasio-Cortez forced a dismissive laugh, though it sounded thinner this time. Those are legitimate political organizations that support progressive candidates across the country. We are building a movement. Legitimate organizations, Bongino countered, that were used to move money in circles until no one could trace where it actually went. He held up the diagram so the cameras could focus on the flow. Let me walk you through it, step by step. Simple enough for everyone watching at home to understand. He pointed to the first box. Step 1. Donations come into brand new Congress PAC. Small donors, working people. People like the ones in your district who believed in your message about fighting corruption. They gave $20, $50, whatever they could afford. Some of them skipped meals to donate. He traced a thick black line down the chart. Step 2. That money then gets paid to Brand New Congress LLC, a private, for-profit, limited liability company. The payment is listed as campaign services. Sounds legitimate, right? He traced another line. Step 3. Brand New Congress LLC then pays a company called Middle Seat Consulting for more services. Bongino looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. Want to guess who controls Middle Seat Consulting? Silence. Saikat Chakrabarti, Bongino answered for her. Your former chief of staff. The same man who founded Justice Democrats. The same man who recruited you to run for Congress in the first place. The man who discovered you at a casting call. Yes, Bongino added, seeing the look on a reporter's face. A casting call for progressive candidates. He set the diagram down. The money goes in a circle, he explained, from PAC to LLC to consulting firm, and finally, back into the pockets of your inner circle. Along the way, millions of dollars simply disappear into vague categories like strategic consulting and operating expenses. He pulled out a stack of official filings. Federal Election Commission records show over $1 million in payments that cannot be properly accounted for, Bongino stated. The documentation is missing. The services are undefined. The money just vanished. He spread the papers out like a royal flush. The FEC has received multiple formal complaints about these arrangements. They have been investigating for years. The only reason charges haven't been filed is because the commission has been deadlocked along partisan lines. He leaned forward. But the FBI doesn't have that problem, and they have been looking at this very carefully. Ocasio-Cortez's attorney was writing furiously on a legal pad now. His face was pale. He wasn't whispering anymore. Bongino moved to the next document. Let's talk about something more specific, he said. Let's talk about your boyfriend. The room went very still. This was personal. This was the third rail. Riley Roberts, Bongino said, your longtime partner. By all accounts, a nice enough guy. But he is not a political operative. He is not a campaign strategist. He is not a communications expert. His background is in web development. Bongino set down a series of payment records. Your campaign and associated PACs paid Riley Roberts $6,000 a month, every month, for over a year, for marketing consulting. He did the math out loud. That is more than $72,000 from donor money for marketing consulting. He looked at Ocasio-Cortez. What did he produce? Bongino asked. What campaigns did he create? What marketing strategies did he develop? What deliverables exist with his name on them? The silence stretched. It was painful. I'll answer for you, Congresswoman, Bongino said. Nothing. There is no portfolio, no documented work product, no evidence that he did anything at all to earn that money. Just checks, he said, written to your boyfriend, from funds donated by working people who thought they were supporting a political movement. Ocasio-Cortez's voice rose defensively, shrill and desperate. Riley provided valuable digital strategy and ongoing consultation on, "Then show me." Bongino's voice cracked like a whip, cutting through her explanation. "Show this committee one single piece of work he produced. One strategy document. One campaign creative. One email chain discussing deliverables. One anything." She didn't respond. She couldn't. "I have reviewed every filing," Bongino said. "Every document your campaign produced. His name appears only on payment records, never on any actual work product." Bongino pulled out another piece of paper. It was a single sheet, printed on cheap copy paper. "But here is where it gets really interesting," he said. "Let me tell you about Maria Gonzalez." He paused, letting the name settle into the room. It wasn't a famous name. It wasn't a powerful name. "Maria Gonzalez," Bongino said, "single mother of 2, lives in the Bronx, in your district, the district you claim to represent and fight for." He set down a printed statement. "Maria works 2 jobs," Bongino detailed. "She cleans office buildings downtown at night. During the day, she works at a laundromat folding other people's clothes. She makes about $14 an hour when you average it out. No benefits, no sick days, no vacation." He looked at the document. "In 2018, Bongino said, Maria donated $50 to your campaign." He looked up. "That $50 represented a full day's wages for her. She had to skip buying groceries that week to afford it. She fed her kids rice and beans so she could send you money." "She believed in you," Bongino said quietly. "She watched your videos. She saw someone who looked like her, who talked about struggles like hers, who promised to fight for people the system had forgotten." He tapped the payment record for Riley Roberts. "Maria's $50, Bongino said, helped pay your boyfriend $6,000 a month to produce nothing." His voice dropped lower. "Maria skipped meals so her kids could eat that week," he said, "and her donation went to subsidize your boyfriend's lifestyle." Ocasio-Cortez blinked rapidly. Her eyes were getting wet. Whether from genuine emotion or calculation, it was hard to tell. That is a gross mischaracterization of how campaign finance works. We have strict compliance protocols." "Is it?" Bongino reached into the folder and pulled out an email printout. "Let me read you something," he said. "This is an email from your personal account to Saikat Chakrabarti, dated March 15, 2019. He adjusted his glasses and read slowly, making sure every word was captured by the microphones. Quote, "Make sure the transfers don't look connected. Use different entity names for each step. The small donors can never find out who's really benefiting from their money. Keep it clean on paper." End quote. He set the email down on the table. "That isn't staff making accounting errors," Bongino said. "That isn't confusion about complicated campaign finance regulations." "That is you," he said, pointing a finger at her, "personally and directly instructing your chief of staff to hide where the money was going." A Democratic member of the committee shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The ranking member was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The squad members sitting nearby were looking at their phones, desperate to disassociate. "You told Maria Gonzalez and thousands of donors just like her that their money was funding a movement," Bongino said. "A revolution. A fight for the working class against the corrupt establishment." Bongino's voice hardened into steel. "It was funding your inner circle, your boyfriend, your political operatives, your personal lifestyle." He pulled out one final document from this section. "Total amount of donor money," Bongino read, "that went directly to entities controlled by you your boyfriend, or your close personal associates, based on FEC filings and corporate registry records. $4.2 million. He let that number sit in the air like a poisonous fog. $4.2 million, he repeated, from people like Maria Gonzalez, from people who sacrificed for you, who believed you were different from every other politician. He closed that section of the folder with a heavy thud. But that is just the money we can trace to American donors, Bongino said ominously. Not all the money came from Americans. He opened the next section. And that, he said, is where this story gets really dark. Dan Bongino turned to a new tab in the folder. This section didn't just have documents. It had photographs clipped to the top. Images that had shaped political history. Images that every person in the room recognized instantly. June 24, 2018, Bongino began, reading the date like an indictment. A date that transformed your entire career. A date that made you a national figure. He held up the famous photograph. It showed Ocasio-Cortez at the border fence in Tornillo, Texas. She was dressed in white, her hand pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down her face, the very image of compassion confronting cruelty. This image went viral within hours, Bongino said. It was shared millions of times. It launched 1,000 news segments and magazine covers. It turned you from a long-shot primary challenger into a national icon of the progressive movement. He set it down gently, almost reverently. A young Latina congresswoman, overcome with emotion at the sight of immigrant children separated from their parents. It was powerful. It was moving. It was exactly what the moment needed. He paused, his hand hovering over the next photo. There is just one problem with that narrative. He held up the second photograph. This was taken 5 minutes before the famous shot. Same location. Same day. Same photographer, actually, who kept all his raw images and was kind enough to share the complete sequence with federal investigators. The second photo showed Ocasio-Cortez in the same white outfit at the same fence. But she wasn't crying. She was laughing with her staff, checking her makeup in a phone screen held by an aide, adjusting her hair for the lighting conditions. And this one, Bongino said, producing a third image, was taken 12 minutes after the crying photo. Ocasio-Cortez smiling broadly, posing for selfies with supporters near the fence. Not a tear in sight. Her makeup fresh and perfect. Your grief lasted exactly as long as it needed to for the photographers to get the shot, Bongino said. Approximately 5 minutes, sandwiched between makeup checks and fan selfies. Ocasio-Cortez shook her head vigorously, her voice rising in panic. Those photos are completely taken out of context. I was genuinely overwhelmed by what I saw at that facility. You are trying to dehumanize. Were you? Bongino pulled out a text message log. This is from your communications director that morning, sent 3 hours before you arrived at the facility. He adjusted his glasses and read from the printout. Quote, "Make sure photographers are positioned at the fence before she arrives. We need the emotion shot. Have tissues ready in case she needs them. Tell her to think about something sad if she needs to get the tears going." End quote. He set the text log down next to the photos. The emotion shot, Bongino repeated. That is what your team called it. Not a genuine moment of human compassion. A shot. A performance. Something to be manufactured and captured for maximum political impact. He pulled out another text exchange. And this one is from you, he said. Sent to your campaign manager 2 hours after the photos were taken. Quote, "The crying pic is blowing up everywhere. This is going to be massive for fundraising. Get the donation page ready. We need to capitalize before the news cycle moves on." End quote. Bongino's voice dropped lower, harder. The children in those facilities were real, Congresswoman. Their fear was real. Their confusion about being separated from their parents was real. Their suffering was real. He looked directly at her. "And you used them as props for a fundraising email." Ocasio-Cortez's voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion, or perhaps just the realization that the mask had slipped. "I care deeply about those children. I have fought tirelessly for immigration reform." "Have you?" Bongino pulled out a calendar document. "This is your official congressional schedule for the 2 years following that famous photograph. Let's count how many times you visited a border facility to actually engage with the issue." He flipped through the pages slowly. "The answer is 0. Not once. You never went back. The photo op was enough." He pulled out more documents. "But you did find time to do 427 media interviews about the border. You found time for magazine photo shoots and documentary appearances. You found time to raise $11.3 million off immigration-related appeals." He set the papers down. "You just never found time to actually go back and do anything substantive about the problem." He spread out printouts of her social media posts. "You called those facilities concentration camps. You compared Border Patrol agents to Nazi guards. You said America was operating a system of state-sponsored terror against brown children." He looked at her. Strong words, inflammatory words, words designed to generate maximum outrage and maximum donations. He pulled out a different document, a police report. Words that also put targets on the backs of federal agents trying to do an impossible job. He read from the report. 3 Border Patrol agents were physically assaulted by protesters who cited your rhetoric as justification. One of them, Agent Manuel Padilla, was hospitalized for 2 weeks with a severe concussion and 3 broken ribs. He has a wife and 3 young children who spent those 2 weeks wondering if their father would ever be the same. Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth. For once, nothing came out. "You got your headlines," Bongino said coldly. "Agent Padilla got brain damage and broken bones." He closed that section of the folder. But exploiting immigrants for donations and social media engagement isn't even the worst thing you have done. He opened the next section of the folder, the final major section. "The worst thing," he said, "is what you really think about the people who actually voted for you. The people who believed you were one of them." Dan Bongino paused before opening the final section. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was quieter, almost sad. "This is the part that is going to hurt the most," he said. "Not you, Congresswoman. You already know what is in here. You lived it." He looked toward the gallery, toward the cameras. "This is going to hurt the people watching at home, the people who believed in you, the people who saw you as a symbol of hope. Let's start with Amazon." Ocasio-Cortez visibly stiffened. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. 2019, Bongino recounted. "Amazon announces plans to build a second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens, your district." He pulled out economic projections. 25,000 jobs, Bongino listed. Not minimum wage jobs, professional positions with an average salary of $150,000 per year. Direct investment of over $2 billion into your community. Tax revenue that would have funded schools and infrastructure for decades. He spread out news clippings from that time. "You led the opposition. You organized protests. You called it corporate welfare. You said the tax incentives were a giveaway to a billionaire who didn't need help. He pulled out a statement from Amazon. And it worked. Amazon pulled out. They took those 25,000 jobs somewhere else. They invested those billions of dollars in a different community. You celebrated. You called it a victory for the people. Your supporters cheered. He paused. But a victory for which people, exactly? He pulled out an email. This is from your personal account, sent to a major donor 1 week after Amazon announced they were withdrawing. He read slowly, carefully making sure every word was heard. Quote, "The Amazon thing worked out even better than we expected. Those tech workers would have completely gentrified the district within 5 years. They would have voted for centrist Democrats or even Republicans. Better to keep the current voter base in place. Poor people who depend on government programs are reliable voters for us. That is our base. That is our path to power." End quote. The hearing room was absolutely silent. No one moved. You didn't kill those 25,000 jobs because of principle, Bongino said slowly. You killed them because financially secure, well-educated voters might not need you anymore. He set the email down. 25,000 families, he said. 25,000 chances for working people in your district to build wealth, to buy homes, to send their kids to good colleges, to achieve the American dream you claim to fight for. He looked at her with disgust. And you killed it deliberately, because their success would have threatened your political power. Ocasio-Cortez was shaking now. Her voice came out strangled. That is not what I meant. It is being taken completely out of... What did you mean then? Bongino snapped. Explain it. Tell the people in your district what you meant when you said it is better to keep them poor and dependent. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Bongino pulled out phone records. Amazon was cold calculation, political strategy. This next part is personal. This is what you really think about the people who trusted you. He held up a thick printout. These are text messages from your personal cell phone, obtained legally through a warrant issued as part of an ongoing federal investigation into campaign finance violations. He found a specific page. March 15, 2021. Text message to a college friend from your Boston University days. He read slowly, letting each word land like a physical blow. Quote, "These Bronx people are honestly so easy to manipulate. Just say the word socialism a few times and throw in some Spanish phrases, and they cheer like trained seals." End quote. Gasps from the gallery. A staffer walked out of the room, hand over her mouth. Bongino continued. Same conversation. 2 minutes later. Quote, "They'll vote for me literally no matter what I do. They are not smart enough to realize when they are being played. All I have to do is say, I am fighting for them, and they believe it." End quote. More gasps. Someone in the gallery was crying. And then this one, Bongino said. Quote, "The Bronx is basically just my brand at this point, like a logo I own. I would never in a million years actually live there again. Can you imagine?" End quote. He set the phone records down. Those are your words, Congresswoman. Your private thoughts, written to a friend when you thought no one would ever see them, when you felt safe enough to say what you actually believe. Ocasio-Cortez's voice was barely a whisper. Broken. Those texts are taken completely out of context. I was venting about the pressures of... What context makes it acceptable to call your voters trained seals? Bongino asked. What context makes it okay to say they are too stupid to know when they are being played? More silence. What context makes calling your district just a brand anything other than contempt for the people who elected you? Bongino didn't wait for an answer. There is no context that makes any of that acceptable. There is just you saying what you really believe. He pulled out one more piece of evidence. Speaking of your connection to the community, Bongino said, let's talk about your heritage, your identity. Ocasio-Cortez tensed visibly. You present yourself as a Latina from the Bronx, a daughter of the working class, a woman connected to her Puerto Rican roots. He pulled out a transcript. This is from a Univision interview last year. You attempted to answer several questions in Spanish. Here is what a professional linguist who reviewed the tape had to say. He read from the analysis, quote, "The subject speaks Spanish at approximately an intermediate tourist level. Her pronunciation is heavily Americanized. Her grammar is consistently incorrect in ways that a native speaker raised in a Spanish-speaking household would never make. The errors suggest someone who learned Spanish as a second language in school, rather than at home." End quote. He set it down. You perform being Latina for the cameras. You use Spanish phrases as props. But the actual language? The actual culture? The actual connection to the community? You never really had it. Ocasio-Cortez was crying now, tears cutting lines through her makeup. My family is Puerto Rican. I am Puerto Rican. This is a racist attack on my identity. It isn't an attack on Puerto Ricans, Congresswoman, Bongino said softly. It is an observation about you. You grew up in Yorktown Heights, he reminded her. Median household income $96,000 a year. One of the wealthier suburbs in New York. Nice houses, good schools, safe streets, country clubs nearby. There is nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with having a comfortable childhood. Nothing wrong with being fortunate. But that isn't the story you tell, is it? You tell people you are from the Bronx, from the struggle, from the streets, because that story sells better. Because that story gets donations. He shook his head slowly. You stole the identity of your own community. You appropriated their struggle, their story, their pain, to advance your career. And in private, you laugh at them for being stupid enough to believe you. He closed the folder. That isn't democratic socialism, Congresswoman. That isn't fighting for the working class. That is just fraud. Plain and simple fraud. The hearing room felt different now. The energy had shifted completely. The confident arena of political theater had become something else. Something quieter. Something sadder. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat slumped in her chair. Her makeup was ruined, streaks of mascara cutting dark lines through the foundation her team had applied so carefully that morning. The polished warrior who had walked in, the one ready to clap back, ready to go viral, had been replaced by something smaller, something broken. I want to respond, she said. Her voice was thick from crying, wet and nasal. I have the right to respond to these accusations. Chairman James, a Republican from Michigan, who had been watching the demolition in silence, nodded once. The witness has concluded his testimony. The Congresswoman may make a statement. Ocasio-Cortez straightened in her chair. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing the makeup further. She tried to find the fire that had always come so naturally before. She tried to summon the fighter who had never backed down from a Twitter feud. This is a political witch hunt, she began. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through, forcing volume into her words. A coordinated attack by right-wing forces who are terrified of strong, progressive women. Every piece of so-called evidence presented today has been taken out of context, twisted, manipulated, weaponized by people who want to silence the voice of working people in this country. She looked at the cameras, desperate to find her audience, to find the lens that would transmit her defiance to her millions of followers. "They are afraid of us," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "Afraid of a movement that threatens their grip on power. So they dig through our emails, our private text messages, our personal lives, looking for anything they can twist into a scandal." She turned to face Bongino directly. "You are a failed cop who couldn't cut it in law enforcement," she spat. "A conspiracy theorist who peddles nonsense to angry people for money. A puppet for billionaires who want to crush the dreams of ordinary Americans." She lifted her chin, trying to regain the high ground. "Nothing you have said here today changes who I am, or what I stand for." The room waited. The air was heavy. Bongino watched her finish. He didn't interrupt. He didn't frown. He just slowly reached back into his briefcase. "You done?" He pulled out one final document. It was sealed in a plastic sleeve. "Because I have something else you should see." He set it on the table. "This is a cooperation agreement," Bongino said, "signed 6 months ago. By Saikat Chakrabarti, your former chief of staff, the man who built your entire political operation from the ground up." The color drained completely from Ocasio-Cortez's face. It wasn't a gradual fade, it was instant, like a light being switched off. "He has been talking to federal investigators for half a year," Bongino revealed. "He provided the emails, he provided the financial records, he provided the text messages. Everything I presented today came from the man who knows exactly how your operation worked because he helped build it." Bongino pulled out another document. "Your boyfriend, Riley Roberts," he said. "He has been interviewed twice by the FBI. He provided detailed records of every payment he received and exactly what he did to earn them, which was nothing. He is cooperating in exchange for leniency." Another document hit the table. 4 former staff members have given sworn statements about the working conditions in your office, the unpaid overtime, the verbal abuse, the threats against anyone who complained. He spread them all across the table like a winning hand of poker. "You called this a witch hunt," Bongino said quietly. "But witch hunts chase imaginary enemies. The evidence against you is documented, corroborated, real." Ocasio-Cortez turned desperately to her right. She looked at her colleagues, the other members of the squad, the women who had stood beside her through every controversy, who had defended her against every attack on cable news. "Ilhan," she whispered. "Rashida, Ayanna, you know this is political persecution. You know what they are trying to do. Say something. Tell them." Representative Ilhan Omar studied her notes intently, refusing to look up. Representative Rashida Tlaib was suddenly fascinated by something on her phone. Representative Ayanna Pressley looked away, out toward the gallery, staring at nothing in particular. No one spoke. No one moved to defend her. "They aren't coming to rescue you," Bongino said quietly. "They have known this was coming for weeks. We made sure they knew. And they have already made their choices." He pulled out printed statements from the folder. "Representative Omar released this 45 minutes ago," Bongino read. Quote, "I have no knowledge of Representative Ocasio-Cortez's financial arrangements and cannot speak to any ongoing investigation." End quote. Another paper. Representative Tlaib released this morning. Quote, "Each congressional office is responsible for its own compliance with campaign finance regulations. I wish my colleague well during this difficult period." End quote. Representative Presley hasn't released a formal statement, Bongino noted, but she unfollowed you on all social media platforms yesterday, and she has deleted every photograph featuring both of you from the last 3 years. They saw the evidence, Bongino said. They calculated the odds. They chose to save themselves. Ocasio-Cortez looked around the room with growing desperation. She looked at her staff, who wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked at her colleagues, who were finding reasons to be anywhere else. She looked at the cameras that were still rolling, capturing every second of her collapse in high definition. She was utterly, completely alone. "This isn't fair," she whispered. The words came out broken, like a child's complaint. "I was trying to help people. I was trying to change things. I was trying to make a difference." Dan Bongino's voice was not cruel when he responded. It was tired, disappointed. "Maybe you were," he said. "Once, at the beginning. Maybe there was a version of you who actually believed the things you said, who actually wanted to help Maria Gonzalez." He closed his briefcase. The click of the latches echoed in the silence. "But somewhere along the way," Bongino said, "you started believing you were special, that the rules didn't apply to you, that you were too important to be held accountable, that the people who supported you were tools to be used rather than citizens to be served." He looked at her with something that might have been pity. "I don't think you are evil, Congresswoman," he said. "I think you are what happens when someone gets famous too fast, gets too much power too young, with no one around willing to tell them no. I think you got lost," he said, "somewhere between your first viral tweet and your 50th magazine cover." He stood up. "But that doesn't undo the damage," Bongino said. "That doesn't give back the money. That doesn't unbreak the trust. That doesn't help the people you hurt." Chairman James cleared his throat and addressed the room formally. "This committee has heard extensive testimony and examined substantial evidence regarding potential violations of federal campaign finance law, wire fraud statutes, and congressional ethics standards." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Based on the proceedings today, I am directing committee staff to prepare a formal referral to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. Additionally," James said, "I am recommending that the House Ethics Committee open its own investigation immediately." "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he said gravely, "you are strongly advised to retain experienced legal counsel. This hearing is adjourned." He brought the gavel down with a sharp crack. Ocasio-Cortez tried to stand. Her legs didn't cooperate. She grabbed the table for support, her knuckles white against the wood. Her staff rushed over to help her, hands reaching out to steady her. She pushed them away with trembling hands. "I can walk out of here myself," she hissed. She made it 3 steps toward the door before the wall of camera flashes started. It was a blinding storm of light and noise. Reporters were shouting questions from every direction, a cacophony of accusation. "Congresswoman, will you resign? Do you have a response to the text messages? What do you say to the donors who trusted you? Will you cooperate with the federal investigation?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Words had always been her weapon, her shield, her superpower. But now, they had abandoned her completely. She pushed through the crowd, eyes fixed on the floor, and disappeared into the hallway. The door closed behind her. The cameras kept flashing, capturing the empty space where she had been. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was already gone. Her career didn't end with handcuffs or a dramatic confrontation in the street. It didn't end with a defiant speech on the Capitol steps. It ended with silence, closed doors, and the sound of her friends walking away. And somehow, that was worse. The news spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within 1 hour, the video clips were everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. The platforms she had mastered were now the engines of her destruction. The clip of Bongino reading her private texts about trained SEALs went viral instantly. Within 2 hours, every cable network had cleared their regular programming for continuous coverage. Even friendly networks couldn't ignore the magnitude of the evidence. Within 3 hours, the first calls for resignation came. Not from Republicans. From members of her own party in competitive districts, desperate to distance themselves from the blast radius. Quiet calls, careful calls, but calls nonetheless. The queen of the progressives had fallen, and the silence from her allies was deafening. In the Bronx, the air felt different that evening. It wasn't the charged, frantic atmosphere of Washington, D.C., where careers were ending and alliances were shattering in real time. Here, the mood was heavier. It was the quiet, suffocating weight of disappointment. Maria Gonzalez sat in her small apartment on the 4th floor of a walk-up near Parkchester. Her feet ached, a deep, throbbing pain that never really went away after a 10-hour shift, standing on the concrete floor of the laundromat. Usually, this was the time of day when she would turn off her mind, maybe watch a telenovela, maybe help her youngest daughter with math homework. But tonight, the television was tuned to the news. The screen was old, the colors a little washed out, but the image was clear enough. It showed the clip that was playing on every channel in America. Dan Bongino reading the text messages. These Bronx people are honestly so easy to manipulate. They cheer like trained SEALs. Maria didn't scream. She didn't throw anything at the screen. She just sat there, her hands resting in her lap, holding a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was a printout of an email receipt from 2018. Amount $50, orders recipient, Ocasio-Cortez for Congress. Note, for our future. Maria looked down at the paper. She remembered that week vividly. It was the week she had decided not to buy the good meat for Sunday dinner. It was the week she had told her daughter she couldn't go on the school field trip to the museum because they needed to save every penny. She had taken that money that represented hours of folding strangers' clothes, hours of scrubbing floors, and she had sent it to the woman on the television. I believed her, Maria whispered to the empty room. Her English was heavily accented, but her words were precise. She had practiced them in her head all afternoon, ever since her sister had called her from work, crying, telling her to turn on the news. I told my girls, Maria said, her voice trembling. I told them, look at her. She looks like us. She talks like us. She comes from here. I told them that if they worked hard, if they were brave, maybe they could be like her one day. She looked back at the screen. The cameras were showing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rushing down a hallway, surrounded by security, ignoring questions. She looked small. She looked scared. But she didn't look like a victim to Maria. She looked like a thief. She called us stupid, Maria said, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her weathered cheek. She said we were easy to manipulate. She laughed at us with her rich friends in Washington. The betrayal wasn't financial. Maria knew how to lose money. She had been losing money to a system rigged against her for 20 years. A landlord raising the rent, a boss shorting her hours, a medical bill she couldn't pay. Losing $50 was nothing new. But losing hope? That was different. That is the worst part, she realized, crushing the receipt in her hand. She stole the hope. I can earn another $50. I can work an extra shift. But how do I get the hope back? How do I tell my daughters to believe in the next one? Across the district, in the bodegas of Castle Hill, in the crowded apartments of Jackson Heights, in the late-night diners where exhausted workers grabbed coffee before the night shift, the same scene was playing out. There were no protests in the streets. There were no riots. There was just a collective, heartbreaking realization that they had been used. They had been props in her movie, background characters in her brand. And now that the credits were rolling, they were left with nothing but the bill. 300 miles away, Dan Bongino sat in a studio chair for his one and only interview of the night. Every network had asked him. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they were all desperate for the victory lap. They wanted him to gloat. They wanted him to spike the football. He turned them all down. He chose a small, independent podcast, one that focused on government accountability. The host leaned in. Dan, you destroyed her today. You ended a political career in 2 hours. How does it feel? Are you proud? Bongino looked at the camera. His face didn't show triumph. It showed exhaustion. Proud isn't the word, Bongino said slowly. There is nothing here to be proud of. What happened today wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. Think about it, he said. A young woman, incredibly talented, incredibly charismatic, destroyed her own life because of arrogance and greed. Thousands of people who believed in her feel betrayed tonight. Her district still doesn't have the 25,000 jobs she killed. The immigrant families she used as props are still suffering at the border. I didn't create this situation, Bongino said. I just exposed it. I walked into a room and turned on the lights. The cockroaches were already there. Do you feel any sympathy for her? The host asked. Bongino thought for a long moment. He thought about the woman who had laughed at him at the start of the hearing, the woman who thought she was untouchable. I feel sympathy for who she could have been, Bongino said. She had the gifts. She had the platform. If she had used those gifts honestly, if she had actually cared about Maria Gonzalez instead of Riley Roberts, she could have been a giant. He shook his head. But she made choices. Every day, she made a choice to lie. Every day, she made a choice to put herself first. And today, the bill came due. Later that night, Bongino sat alone in his home office. The house was quiet. His family was asleep. The folder, the one labeled Ocasio-Cortez, the fraud, sat on his desk. Its contents were no longer secret. They were now evidence in a federal investigation. He stared at it for a long time. He knew how this story ended. He had seen it before with other politicians, other stars who burned out when the fuel of corruption ran dry. His phone buzzed on the desk, a single text message from his contact at the bureau. New file on your desk tomorrow morning. Different name, same pattern. Get some sleep. Bongino read the message twice. He sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of everything he had seen that day. There was always another one. Always another politician who believed they were above the rules. Always another true believer who traded their soul for a seat at the table. He picked up the Ocasio-Cortez folder and walked to his filing cabinet. He opened the drawer. It was full of similar folders, a graveyard of broken promises. He slid this one in, right at the front. Then he turned off the light. Tomorrow, the work would continue. It always did. 3 days later, the letter arrived. It wasn't a press conference. There were no cameras, no viral moments, no defiant speeches on the steps of the Capitol. It was a single sheet of paper, delivered by a messenger to the Speaker of the House. I hereby resign my seat in the United States Congress, effective immediately, it read. The letter was brief, clinical, and utterly devoid of accountability. It cited a need to focus on personal matters and spend time with family. It did not admit to any wrongdoing. It did not apologize to the donors. It did not acknowledge the staff she had abused or the constituents she had mocked. It was the final act of a narcissist, leaving the stage before the audience could boo. But the resignation didn't stop the machine. The investigation continued without her. Subpoenas were issued, grand juries were convened. The Department of Justice doesn't care about resignations, it cares about statutes. Saikat Chakrabarti was indicted 2 weeks later. Riley Roberts cut a plea deal to avoid jail time, turning over hard drives that contained the digital roadmap of the fraud. The squad fractured. Without their star, without their media magnet, they turned on each other. The movement that was supposed to change America dissolved into infighting and recriminations. But in the Bronx, life went on. The sun rose over the tenements and the high-rises. The trains rattled on the elevated tracks. The bodegas opened their metal shutters. Maria Gonzalez woke up at 5 a.m., just like she always did. She made coffee. She woke her daughters for school. She put on her uniform for the laundromat. She had bills to pay. She had children to feed. She didn't have the luxury of taking time off to grieve a broken political dream. The world didn't stop just because a politician lied. Before she left the apartment, she walked into the small living room. On the wall, next to a picture of the Pope and a photo of her late husband, there was a poster. It was the famous one, the stylized purple and yellow image of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez looking toward the horizon with the slogan, "A future for all of us." Maria looked at it for a long moment. She remembered the day she bought it at a street fair. She remembered how proud she had felt taping it to the wall. Slowly, carefully, she peeled the tape from the corners. She took the poster down. She didn't rip it. She didn't crumple it in anger. She just folded it. Once, twice, until the face was hidden. She walked to the kitchen and opened the trash can. She dropped the folded poster on top of the coffee grounds and eggshells. "Adios," she whispered. She closed the lid. She picked up her purse, checked her pocket to make sure she had her subway card, and walked out the door. The hallway was quiet. She walked down the 4 flights of stairs and stepped out into the morning air. It was cold, but the sun was shining. Maria Gonzalez started walking toward the train. She had a long day ahead of her, and for the first time in a long time, she knew that no one was coming to save her. She would have to save herself. Narrator voice returns. This story isn't just about the fall of one politician. It is a warning. It is a warning that charisma is not character, that a viral tweet is not a policy, that the people who claim to shout the loudest for the poor are often the ones living furthest from them. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez built a castle out of words, and Dan Bongino knocked it down with a folder of receipts. But the tragedy isn't that she fell. The tragedy is that she took the trust of millions of people with her. If this story reminded you that the truth matters more than the narrative, hit that like button. If you want to see more investigations into the people who claim to represent you, share this video. Let the world see what happens when the receipts finally come out. And if you are tired of being lied to by people who get rich while you get by, subscribe. Because the filing cabinet is full. There are more names. There are more folders. and we are going to open every single one of them.